Hey everybody, welcome back inside the NFL Combine here. Matthew Coller along with Colton Pouncy, first time ever in person, not the first time on the show, covers the Detroit Lions for The Athletic. Dare I say one of the elite athletic beat reporters. I'll go there. I've followed your work for a couple of years now, Colton.
Checks in the mail.
Exactly. You do great stuff, and I am very curious about the Detroit Lions offseason because I now don't know who your coordinators are. And if you asked me right now, I'd be like, not sure. I knew him before, but now I don't. So I am really interested, though, because when there's two things happening with Detroit that have my attention. Number one is, of course, how much the coordinator changes are going to alter what Detroit can do going forward here, because it's not always a guarantee just based on the roster.
Yep.
But also, I keep going to overthecap.com, and I'm like, no, Detroit signed all those contracts with people, right? How could they? They don't have it couldn't be. There's a lot of cap space there, Colton. Let's start with that. What is the plan to spend the cap space that the Detroit Lions have?
So I see on the outside how it can look like they have a lot of cap space to play with, and I'm sure they have enough room for some, let's say, singles and doubles instead of the home run swings, but they do set aside some of that money for extensions, and they like to take care of their own. That's, Brad Holmes always says, we don't want to sign an external guy that we don't know and give him a big contract, and that if that doesn't work out, then it ends up costing us one of our young guys that we do know about and that we drafted and developed. And so they do try to take care of their own and do that early so they can beat other players to the market and other teams. So some of that money will be set aside for sure. Kirby Joseph will be entering his fourth year, and he's a guy they want to keep around. Was an All-Pro this past season. Aiden Hutchinson, they're already having discussions with him. Brad told us that the other day. So, some of that money will be set aside for the future. But I do think they'll have some money to play with, and maybe you can get, say, a Khalil Mack type if you don't, Zary Smith, he's still around, but his contract's a little weird. He's got some void years on the back end, so you can, have a clean slate if you want, and maybe you use that money elsewhere. So they can do some short-term things, but I think most of that money will be set aside for future stuff. And
discussions about Zadarius Smith's contract. Where have I heard that before?
It's a new one here, right?
Every single year Zadarius Smith has been in the NFL. Okay, so I shouldn't look at it as in Vikings should be terrified that the Lions are going to go steal all of their top free agents, but what are we talking about in terms of need? Maybe all the defensive players to stay healthy, but that's not something you get in free agency. They last year did not have a lot of areas in a healthy roster that I would have looked at and said, oh, well, they're this or that away. It was almost a flawless roster when it was fully healthy. So what does it need now? Like, what's the top priority?
That's the question we're all trying to figure out. Brad was even like, when we are at full strength, like, there's not a ton of holes, and you can always improve depth, and, guys are going to leave, and got some guys that are, going to be free agents. So you got some depth like a Levi Onwuzurike, who really came on that last year. It was a second-round pick in 2021, was hurt. He had about 48 pressures this past season. I could see a team trying to take him away and giving him $10 million. That's a guy that you probably are going to need to replace. So I look at, really, you start at DT, you can start there. Aleem McNeil is coming off a torn ACL. DJ Reader, he's in the final year of his contract. He's getting up there in age, so maybe look for a future replacement for him. Levi could leave, things like that. At edge, we'll see what happens with Zadarius. If you don't want to bring him back, you got to replace him, or even just in a good edge class, as we think, just based on what we've seen so far. Maybe you can get a guy that you can develop and keep Zadarius for 1 year and let the guy take over next year. So really, I'm looking at future stuff. And then the other area I would say is maybe interior offensive line, which I know the Vikings probably need some of themselves.
Oh, did you notice that from week 18?
Yeah.
Was there something that tipped you off?
Maybe a couple things, but that's about it.
I said he was a great reporter, folks.
I see things. What can I say? See things no one else sees. But yeah, Kevin Zeitler is a free agent, and I think the Lions would like to bring him back, but at what cost? I think he would be wanted by a few different teams that are out there, and maybe if you don't bring him back, you got Christian Mahogany, a 6th-round rookie who I think played pretty well in spot starts last year, and then you got Graham Glasgow, who's coming off a pretty poor year, gave up a lot of pressures, and kind of seems like he's on the decline a little bit. So maybe look to upgrade there in the draft to get a young piece to build around. So I would say those three positions: edge, interior offensive line, and defensive tackle.
With Onwuzurike, that's the correct pronunciation, yes?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
It took me like 2 years to get that.
It's not really spelled that way.
It's not.
But he was certainly noticeable against the Vikings. And you don't want to be this team or this analyst, if you will, that says, man, he really killed the Vikings. That'd be a great player to bring into your squad. But, I think what the Vikings have looked for in the past, and we see it from Jonathan Grenard, we see it from Blake Cashman, is that 26, 27-year-old who is on the rise coming out of his rookie contract rather than he's 31, he might be on the decline. And Onwuzurike seems to check that box really well because the first 2 years, I barely noticed him out there. And I was like, oh, I guess that's just not a draft pick that worked out. And then this year, it wasn't just the Vikings game. He was more consistently in the backfield as an impact player. I look at him as a guy that the Minnesota Vikings should be looking at as not that Milton Williams who's coming off the Super Bowl. And it's funny about sacks and pressures because I think we're all grown up enough to know now in the analytics world that pressures are really the thing that's going to travel from year to year.
For sure.
Sacks come and go, but some guys are really good at finishing off plays and things like that. He had a lot of pressures, didn't have a lot of sacks. That actually might help them if they wanted to sign him for a lesser price, because when I look at Williams or even Osa Odigizua, I'm like, that's going to be a lot for those guys. They're good, but that's going to be a lot. I feel like he is the next level down of someone that the Vikings should look at to try to fill that position.
I could see him flying under the radar in free agency just because, as you mentioned, a lot of teams, maybe not teams, but people outside will look at sacks, and it's a low sack total. But he was pretty productive and was a really good, I would say, number 3 defensive tackle for Lions, and ended up playing a lot just because of the injuries. But did a lot of damage there. And they drafted him to be this sort of havoc wreaker. And, first year was a rookie, got a little hurt. Second year missed basically the whole season and with a back injury in training camp, I believe. And third year was like, okay, I got my feet under me, but I still got to relearn how to play football after a year off. And so I think this fourth year, you really saw him take off. And something Brad Holmes tells us, it takes, 3 years to properly evaluate a draft pick. And for him, he had a year taken away. So I almost looked at this last year as year 3 for him. And you saw what he did. And, he really produced. They were playing him inside and out, playing some heavy edge for them. And so a versatile piece, can rush from the interior, solid against the run. So if you're looking for a young ascending guy that can maybe fly under the radar and won't command, $15, $20 million as we know some DTs get, he's probably a good guy to bet on. The question is just, can he stay healthy? Can he hold up? Because he has been a bit injury prone. But if you're okay with that risk, then he can really help a team.
The other free agent I wanted to ask you about was Zeitler, because the Ravens move on from him. Ravens, right?
Yes.
And they must think he's falling off. He's in his mid-30s, and then he has this phenomenal year, right? But also, I think offensive linemen impact each other.
Yes.
And when you're playing with that unit, you're going to look better. If you're the Vikings, though, when we're talking about free agent deals, if you are talking about Trey Smith for $25 million, that one scared me a little bit. And then you have Zeitler, who makes $6 million last year. I mean, I don't know, does he want to make 10 this year in free agency after a really good year? That's another one that I feel like if you're the Vikings and you're looking around and they may want him back in Detroit, he may want to go back to Detroit because he didn't take a huge deal there. But they are desperate to improve this interior, and he seems like a great veteran one-year option for them.
If I'm a team, and my options are a Trey Smith for $20 million or a Kevin Zeitler for maybe 1 year deal, but even if that's $8 million, I'm taking that and I'm drafting a young guard to hopefully develop behind him, and that'll be the succession plan. I'm taking that 10 times out of 10 because Kevin Zeitler is still a very productive player in this league. It was a little strange to me why he left the Ravens. I don't really know the reason behind it, but I looked at the Lions. That was a perfect fit, and they plugged him in between two All-Pros in Frank Ragnow and Penei Sewell, and I think he had a year that reflected that, but he's a really damn good player himself. So I thought that was a really good fit. We'll see what happens in the future. One thing I noticed, I will say, just speaking of that a little bit, Graham Glasgow played right guard for the Lions in 2023, had one of his best years playing between 2 All-Pros. They moved him to the left side. His play kind of tailed off there. So they moved Zeitler to right guard, and he had a great year. So maybe that helps, obviously, as you mentioned, playing between 2 guys like that, but I still think Kevin Zeitler is a really productive player, and if a team needs some interior juice like that, even as a stopgap, I'm taking that and hoping to develop a young guy behind him.
Folks, I'm trying a new thing in order to stop ordering from fast food restaurants all the time with my busy schedule. It's called Tempo Meals. Tempo is a weekly delivery service that delivers chef-crafted meals from a dietitian-approved menu right to your door. Their perfectly portioned lunches and dinners take the guesswork out of eating as well. They're fully prepared, and they can be heated in the microwave in just 3 minutes. I got my first box, and wow. Talk about easy and delicious. I got sweet and tangy chicken, mozzarella marinara chicken, and barbecue chicken. Kind of a trend there, but there's so many more options than that. All of them tasted great for me, were super quick and easy to make. They were my choices out of dozens and dozens that took about 5 clicks to get set up with Tempo meals. For a limited time, Tempo is offering my listeners 60% off your first box. Just go to tempomeals.com/Purple Insider. That is tempomeals.com/Purple Insider for 60% off your first box. Rules and restrictions apply. I just feel like there's a lot of evidence that guards who age well, if they don't have serious injuries, they could just keep being effective into their 30s, probably beyond almost every other position in the league. I don't know what it is about that, but I feel like we're always talking about these 30-year-old guards, even looking in free agents. You know, this guy's 30, this guy's 32. Brandon Scherff is still out there. I've been talking about that guy since I don't know how long, because he's always been available, but you know, then he signs with the Jaguars, and then people think we could trade for him and all that stuff. So anyway, he's just good year after year after year, and the same thing has sort of happened with Kevin Zeitler, so the Vikings should look into him. Let's talk about the reaction to the playoffs and how the front office views that and what they have to deal with a change in the coaching staff, because when you get 15-2 and you win home field advantage, it's like this should be a Super Bowl appearance. And then when it's not, it's crushing. And the only experience I really have with this is 2017 when the Vikings went to the NFC Championship, where they get the Minneapolis Miracle, you're there, and the fan base is feeling it. It's going to happen. And they're playing Nick Foles. And it was the same way, where it's like, Washington won. That's great for them. I mean, I had that thought. I was like, rookie
quarterback,
Sam Darnold just melted down there. The rookie quarterback, what's he going to do? Well, then when Amik Robinson gets hurt on like the third play of the game and everything starts to come apart. But what was the reaction following that? Like, when you lose at that point, it's not like losing in the wild card round where you go, well, it's very clear that you need X, Y, Z or whatever to get to the competitive. It's almost more like, dang. Right?
Yeah. No, you're not wrong. And it was kind of weird to watch unfold, because I think, you know, you could really start, like, I want to say the Bills game in Week 15. So they lose that one, and Evan's like, oh, what are they going to do? They just lost Lee McNeil and Carlton Davis. Those really felt like pretty brutal blows on top of everything else, losing a Hutch and Marcus Davenport and some other players along the way. So that was tough. And then they end up winning their final 3 games of that regular season. You're like, all right, maybe they have enough offensive firepower, and they have to win shootouts. That's the script in the playoffs at that point. And then you get your first game against a guy like Jaden Daniels, who was terrific. And, like, to me, as much as the injuries hurt him, I almost look at that as a coaching failure from top to bottom. Like, I looked at, you know, Aaron Glenn. Jaden Daniels was really good against the blitz, really good against man coverage, and he didn't change his game plan. Those are the 2 things that he loves to do. And maybe that's a week where you're like, maybe we could scale back or change it up a little bit. They stuck to what they did, which to some extent I can respect. But it kind of burned them in the end, because when you're playing man coverage against a guy that can run, you turn your backs, the corners leave, and he can take off and run. Or when you're blitzing, he has the answer to the test. I look at the offensive end. Ben Johnson called, I think it was 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 early in the game, have a chance to go up 14-3. They go empty. They motion David Montgomery out to wide receiver and try to find St. Brown on like a quick pass. And Jared Goff fumbles, there's pressure, and they get it, and they score. And now all of a sudden they're up 10-7. And that was a momentum shift. And there's stuff like that throughout the game. Even in the 4th quarter, you're down 10 points with 12 minutes left. They go reverse to Jamison Williams, and he throws an interception. You're putting the ball in the hands of a very questionable decision maker on and off the field with your season on the line. So there's some stuff like that in the game where you're just like, they kind of got away from what they do. And even Campbell, you know, I know everyone thinks of him as like this sort of, you know, I guess irrational guy sometimes, but he's usually the guy that can reel in Ben Johnson and say, hey, let's run the ball here. Let's get back to what we do best. You didn't really see that impact in the game like that. He was kind of just standing on the sideline, you know. They had 12 men on the field defensively. He didn't call timeout, things like that. So I really thought all 3 of those guys kind of had a bad week, and it can hurt them. It can hurt you in the playoffs, and we saw it in that game for sure.
It's crazy how, and sometimes we just need to see the result to understand it, but it's crazy how pressure could just get to a team.
Yep.
And we saw this happen to Sam Darnold and the Vikings in Detroit. I would argue to the end of the earth that's not what happened in L.A. L.A. just killed their offensive line, and that was that. But in Detroit, the Vikings had opportunity after opportunity, open
They did.
receivers, and just Jefferson dropping 2 passes when I think he dropped 2 all season long.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Darnold, but it was certainly Darnold and it getting to him. And I think it was almost shocking for Detroit when Jaden Daniels was like, no, I'm good. Like, I'm totally fine here. He came right out, and it was so clear he was in command. Oh, the crowd's loud. I don't care. It's fine. They failed on a stupid 4th down trying to run Marcus Mariota. It doesn't matter.
Did not matter at all.
Didn't shake him, didn't stumble. Like, you could see it with his body language. It was almost disturbing. I always thought that Mariano Rivera was like this. He'd walk out like he was half asleep. And I think it was like,
terrifying.
What does he know? You know,
Yeah.
it was like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was that way with Jaden Daniels, where they were like, oh, man, this guy's not freaking out in our environment. And like all our crowd's going crazy, and he doesn't even care. And then the Robinson injury, that also shook them as well. I think that happened to Buffalo when their top corner got hurt early, and they went, oh, no, like we don't have other answers to that. So those games can just sort of snowball and get out of control, and then you lose a playoff game and you go, should everyone be fired? Or like, wait a minute, no. Like, you know, but the reaction has to be super strong. But then what's the actionable thing that they're supposed to do other than just run it back and do the same thing? But the problem with success, the Vikings ran into this 2019. They win a playoff game. Kevin Stefanski gets hired. It's not the same the next year. How much confidence is there that Ben Johnson can be replaced?
That's the big question right now. I think if you look at the direction Dan Campbell went, a lot of us thought, oh, Tanner Engstrand, the pass game coordinator, he'd be the next man up at OC. He's going to New York. I don't know if he was really offered the job. I mean, the Lions went with John Morton, a guy that's worked with Campbell dating back to their time with the Saints in New Orleans. He was here in 2022 as a senior offensive assistant. And the things that you kind of remembered throughout the years, I actually did like a Control F search for Morton's name in my email transcripts just to see like when has Campbell talked about him recently. And you look at it, it's like, oh, random October 2023. Johnny Morton, man, he really helped us create our passing attack under Ben Johnson. There's a lot of stuff that we still keep from what he implemented in that one season. That was so good for us. You see that like years later, he's still talking about this guy. So when the opportunity came open and you know he had a decision to make whether to go internal or external, he went with the guy that he trusted in John Morton that, again, kind of helped build this thing when he was here in 2022. And everything that people say about him is he's detailed. His situational knowledge of football is very, very respected. You know, I think his game planning, he said he loves the challenge of that on a Sunday. Really into digging into tendencies, what teams do on 3rd and short, you know, 4th and long, you know, things like that. And that's what the Lions love. And Campbell really respects a guy that can really grind on that stuff. So that's where they went offensively and defensively. And you got a Calvin Shepard, guy that's been around, knows what Campbell's all about. Shepard was a linebacker with the Dolphins in 2015 when Campbell was the interim coach. And they had a great relationship back then. Was one of his first hires when he got to Detroit and has been here since. And they've kind of been preparing him and AG to take over as DC as early as 2 years ago. So I think he's pretty happy with both of those hires, and we'll see what he does with it. But some good spots for sure.
So on the show, if you hear something from anyone in the NFL, you have to lean in and say in the league. So let me demonstrate here. Someone in the league told me that they thought Aaron Glenn would be a better head coach than he was at DC.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So funny, like my journey of Aaron Glenn takes. Kirk Cousins used to just do terrible things to him. Just put like, oh, here comes a Kirk 400-yard, 4-touchdown. He's going to earn himself 2 more contracts in Detroit this week, and it usually happened. Yeah. And the reason was they played that man coverage all the time. It was like, okay, watch him just boot out and get Jefferson one-on-one. Here it goes. So then the Vikings have this. So I've held that take for a long time. I thought it was a simplistic defense that if you had freaks everywhere, you'd be fine.
Yes.
And if you had great man corners like Carlton Davis, you'll be fine. But if you don't, you're just in trouble. And so then the Vikings go. My whole week leading up to that Vikings game, I'm like, I don't trust Aaron Glenn. He's gonna man coverage his way out of the league. And then, of course, that happens. And the very next week, I was like DiCaprio pointing at the TV, like, that's what I saw. And so now I think they have an opportunity to advance it a little, to update it a little bit. It reminds me of almost Pete Carroll in Seattle, where he was big on that, like, we're going to play that single high, and then he was still playing it, and teams figured it out. It feels Aaron Glenn was almost a little the same way. Yep. So now they can advance it. Look at Brian Flores. Look at moving parts. There was a lot of stagnation. Like I see the best defenses moving around pre-snap a lot. There was a lot of kind of, it looks like Houston Texans 2003 or something like that. I think Aaron Glenn was on the 2003 Texans. So I think they've got a chance to improve there. Mm-hmm. But on the offensive side, are you a gamer? Do you play video games?
Every now and then, yeah.
Okay, so at least you'll understand the reference.
Yeah.
All gamers would know this, that, and I don't have time anymore, but I used to play a lot of video games, that if you play on your controller in your house with your version of the game, and this was on their CDs, you know, every game is a little different. You knew all the glitches. You knew how much you had to press in that X button. Like, it was your controller.
Yep.
You go to somebody else's house, and they're like, you're not as good as Madden. And you say, and you're like, whoa, this is not my controller. I feel like there's a little bit of that with an OC taking over. It's like every button to push. Ben Johnson knew it. I mean, he knew every single thing about that controller on offense. And now someone else coming in and saying, like, okay, I'll just pick up the controller and play. I don't think it can be quite the same. That doesn't mean it can't be good. I just think when someone has such a wonderful feel for everything with that offense, there will be at very least an adjustment, and at most it might not have the same ceiling. I don't know.
Yeah, it's easy to say good players can make good coaches, but you know that's not always the case. I look at the Eagles. You know, after the 2022 season, or was it 23? I can't remember. Whenever they went to the Super Bowl.
After 22 when Shane Steichen left,
Yeah, when they lost Steichen. Like, that was a big deal, and their offense wasn't the same the following year, and a little bit more stagnant, maybe predictable, and they got back to, obviously adding Saquon Barkley helps, but I thought Kellen Moore did a really good job there. Obviously, he just became head coach. So I think coaching matters, man. And it's like Ben Johnson was one of the best play callers in the league for his 3-year run as the Lions OC, and that's going to be hard to replace. And they got better every year because of the continuity that was in place. And Ben learning what guys do best and putting them in positions to succeed throughout the course of multiple seasons. That's something that was rare. It is rare in the NFL to have an OC as good as him in place for that long. And so now, John Morton's been around and Campbell trusts him and they're saying all the right things, but you know, you just don't know until you kind of see it in action. And, you know, they could take a step back offensively, and it could take time for them to gel, and that could cost them games that they thought they might win. And so in a year where they still expect to be Super Bowl contenders, you could take a step back. So, you know, we'll have to see it unfold, but it's not really a slam dunk. Even if people want to think that, it could take time.
Isn't it weird that the guy's name is Johnny Morton?
Yeah. A lot of people have made the connection. Yep.
It had to be said, because what a great wide receiver.
Yeah.
How good will Ben Johnson be as a head coach, in your opinion?
I've been asked that a lot, and if you asked me that in 2022 or 2023, I would say right after his first year as an OC, when teams did want him. The Panthers went after him hard, a couple other teams. I would say he would probably be set up to fail because I didn't think he was ready back then. And he was sort of the mad scientist that never really delegated and was, you know, turning the game plan at like 3 a.m. from a dark room with a dark closet. You know, he was that guy. And he loved playing that mad scientist role. And I think over the years, just knowing, hey, I'm going to have this opportunity eventually, whenever I'm ready, to become a head coach. And so he would have more conversations with Dan Campbell about, you know, addressing the whole team and, you know, thinking outside the offense and just, hey, what's the defense doing on this specific game plan week, things like that. And so I think having that extra time around a guy like Dan Campbell, who is the ultimate leader of men, the ultimate like team first guy. I talk to everybody. We see him whenever they're indoors or outdoors for practice. They're doing their stretching lines. Dan Campbell's going up and down each row, just giving words of encouragement, patting guys on the helmet, you know, things like that. And I think that stuff matters. And being around a guy like that just gets it, you can't help but maybe see some of that, and maybe it rubs off on you. So I think he's better prepared now than he was a couple years ago. Now the question is, like, are you still going to be that mad scientist, or can you lead a whole locker room? And it's not just the young receiver that's going to look up to you because you're a great play caller. It's like the 34-year-old defensive tackle that's been here and maybe is used to a certain style, and you're not that. So I think winning early would help, and it seems like they got some pieces, so if they can get it off the ground pretty quickly, I think that would alleviate some of the need for the leader of men type that he is not. But, I mean, we'll see. Definitely curious to see how it works out in Chicago.
I think of a comparison. You're a real academic fella from Missouri.
MIZ.
Which we get reminded all the time from Alec Lewis of The Athletic.
And Emily Leiker. Another Mizzou.
And new beat reporter here in Minnesota, Emily. So anyway, you, I'm sure, did a lot in college as a journalist to prepare yourself for this beat. But once you got here and started covering the Detroit Lions, you probably had a moment where you're like, oh, man, there was nothing that I did at Missouri that prepared me for this. I think the same thing goes for – you probably wonder where the hell I'm going with all that.
I'm curious myself.
Are you just mocking me? Like, yeah, for a little while, but I'll get to the point.
There you go.
The point being that there is nothing that prepares you to be a head coach. There is nothing. It doesn't matter who you worked for, what environment you were in, who you're friends with, there is so much that goes on. You talk about that X's and O's stuff. So much has to be done by the OC, the quarterback's coach, the offensive line coach, the run game coordinator, because you don't have time as the head coach when you're running a full organization. So it's not just like I think about sometimes the number of human beings that Kevin O'Connell in his noggin has to understand every dynamic with those human beings. It's in the hundreds. It's every player. It's every coach. It's everyone's strengths and weaknesses. You got to balance it all. And by the way, try to keep everybody happy, which is almost impossible. Yet somehow O'Connell gets an A+ from the NFLPA, and Dan Campbell, they do it in different ways. I think O'Connell understands people so well, and Campbell is just this never-ending enthusiasm machine that everyone can kind of connect with because it's football. What does Ben Johnson bring from that perspective? I don't know. Are you going to be a delegator? Are you going to be a manager? Are you going to be – because you can't just stand on that sideline and call plays and say it's everybody else's problem.
Yes.
And I think O'Connell learned that very quickly, actually, in this job. And then, the other thing is, too, that I'm curious is you got to talk to the media 4 times a week all of a sudden. Now you got to speak for everybody. And I think Eberflus really failed in all of that. I thought Eberflus was a fine coordinator.
Great defensive mind.
He'll probably be good. Where is he in Dallas? He'll probably be good. But he just couldn't manage any of that stuff. And one of the players came from Chicago to Minnesota, and I was like, hey, it's better traffic in Minnesota. And he goes, it's better everything. He says it's a circus there all the time. So being in command and having a healthy organization, it all starts with that guy, and no one can ever predict. Look at there are hires like Dan Quinn. Oh, man, who cares? A retread? And you're like, guy's proven he knows what he's doing, though. Yeah. So that's the interesting part of Ben Johnson, I think, for me.
There are different ways to do it, right? You got the leader, man, CEO, that sort of bucket, and then the offensive mind and the young guy that everyone's kind of looking for. And I've said this before on your show, but it's like I think Kevin O'Connell is probably the prime example of what you want, because even Sean McVay, a guy he learned for, he wasn't the most personable guy when he first got the job. He had to kind of learn how to manage people and treat them with respect. I mean, Jared Goff, the way he kind of that thing ended there. It's like I think he learned a lot from that situation, and now he's better for it. But it was rocky at a time there. And Kevin O'Connell is just everything you want. He's a great people person. He's a great offensive mind, and I think that's sort of if there's a spectrum of Kevin O'Connell and like a Mark Trestman, former Bears coach, you want to be on the Kevin O'Connell side.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what Ben Johnson's going to have to figure out, like which side am I on that scale. I think hopefully he can be towards the O'Connell side, but you never know until you see these guys in action and how they kind of deal with the entire team and not just the offense. So that's going to be the question for him for sure in Chicago.
One more thing for you, Colton. And despite, your arrogance about going to Missouri, which just, you can just feel it. No, I'm
palpable.
Yeah, I'm just entirely kidding. So from the Lions' perspective, if you're talking to Dan Campbell out here and you're saying, what do you want the Vikings to do, Dan Campbell? Would he want the Vikings to bring back Darnold because he melted down in that game? Didn't melt down the first game, though. He's actually really good in the first game. Or would he say, hey, that guy just won 14 games. I'd rather them throw out the rookie guy and J.J. McCarthy. What does the opposition want the Vikings to do?
If I'm speaking on behalf of Dan Campbell, I would probably say the latter. He's a guy that – look, I just watched this guy win 14 games. He's a good player. He's always had the talent, maybe not the right situation. And he can probably look at that as through the Jared Goff lens, where it's like, this guy's a talented player. He's not a scrub, right? Like, we just watched him have a good season. And obviously, Campbell's probably Jared Goff's biggest supporter and said, he just needed the right situation. So if you're able to – I know it didn't end well, but you can't discredit everything he did this year. So if I'm speaking on behalf of Campbell, I think he'd probably have the utmost respect for what you guys – or not you guys, but the Vikings got done this past season, and just behind Sam. And that locker room video of him, like right before that Lions game, just was so cool. And that's kind of Kevin O'Connell's culture. So, like, if it does continue, I do think that the Vikings could continue to have success. At the same time, you drafted JJ for a reason, right? Like, that's, you get this guy in here, you work with him, develop him. I know he got hurt this year, but I was really high on him. Got to watch him at Michigan. Think he's a really talented player, and like, I think I would continue investing. Now, speaking for myself, I would continue investing in JJ and try to get the most out of him, out of that draft pick, because I think Kevin O'Connell is a very talented offensive mind and can get the most out of a kid with those kind of traits.
If you are a coach, you'd probably say, give me the inexperienced kid because I can mess with him and,
Sure.
you know, he doesn't know what he's doing out there. And if you're a GM, you're like, I hope they sign him to 40, 50, 60, 70 million dollars a year, and they can't, because that's really been the matchup of the Vikings has been so interesting because it's really been the Lions over the last couple of years with just the better overall roster. And once the thing got healthy as far as organizationally and the roster became what it is, it's like the Vikings can't really compete with the Lions. And, okay, they got a close game here, close game there, but the Lions have owned the Vikings over the last few years. And why is that? Well, interior pressure and, the offense can't be stopped on the ground with Jahmyr Gibbs in the running game. It's like one team just has more good players than the other team. I haven't felt like the Vikings were wildly out-schemed in any of the games that they've played against Detroit. I think it's been pretty even there, but it's like, hey, they make one more play than the Vikings do because of talent.
Yep.
And so if I'm Brad Holmes, I'm like, yes, limit your talent by a big contract rather than making that bet. And also he probably knows the flexibility that Kwesi is going to have coming up into free agency. And over the next really 3 years, 4 years, depending on what happens with McCarthy. So it is an interesting exercise to kind of put yourself in the other team's shoes because he did win 14 games and played pretty darn well. So Colton Pouncy, I enjoy giving you a hard time because you have a good sense of humor, but you are one of my favorite writers in the NFL to follow. You do great work covering the Detroit Lions, and I know Vikings fans are always, keeping an eye on the NFC North. So Colton Pouncy, the guy to go to for Lions coverage. Thanks for coming on, man. Glad we could see each other here at the Combine, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Football.